This is for 6 hours he hung on the cross. In John 19, after he says, Mother, behold thy son. Son, behold thy mother. He says, I thirst. I'm thirsty. Like, it's kind of one of those weird things, right? Like, yeah, Jesus, you probably are thirsty, right? They're hanging up there. And what does it say? What is shown in the video? That pretty soon they grabbed a sponge, they dipped it in vinegar, and they gave it to him. I think to me is because when you read the Bible, and you read all of the Bible, and you realize all the connections that are there in the Bible, in Psalm 69, write that down, Psalm 69. There's a connection about who the Messiah is. He will hang on a tree, he will be thirsty, and they will give him vinegar to drink. He's not up there just because he's thirsty, right? And all of a sudden he's like, you know, a good sparkling bottle of Evian water would be great right now. Everything that he did on the cross was for a reason and for a purpose.
Right.
Everything that he said on the cross, it wasn't just by happenstance. The other thing, not just Psalm 69:21, but think about, we call this the Sermon on the Mount. The very first time that Jesus got together his believers and he said, I want to tell you everything that there is about being a follower. In Matthew chapter 25, they're called the Beatitudes. And one of the Beatitudes, you know what it says? Blessed are those when you are hungry and thirsty, when you hunger and thirst for righteousness. So to me, one of the very first words that is recorded, one of the very first words that are spoken is, it's okay to be thirsty, because when you're thirsty and you're hungry for righteousness, then you'll be filled. Here he is on the cross. And he says, my body, my physical, temporary, temporal body is thirsty, but I know that my soul is filled. You see, I think sometimes what we forget as believers, what we're celebrating today, is that we're no longer going to be tied to this thing. That so many of us are hedonistic. That we just run after what feels good, what's pleasurable. And Jesus, for that moment, is saying it isn't about this temporary shell. It's about what's on the inside. Because when I hunger and I thirst for righteousness, even though I'm about ready to take my last breath, it's okay. John 19:30. It's finished. If you guys remember watching the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, if you guys saw that movie, there's a line at the very end where Aslan, the lion, which is the Christ figure, there's this battle between evil and good, right? Good and evil. It's the White Witch versus Aslan. It's the demonic forces versus the good. The White Witch, she humiliates the lion. If you guys have seen the movie, you've seen that. They tie him, they hold him down. But pretty soon, Aslan comes back to life. And there's this battle, and because he comes back to life, the forces of evil which were winning, when they heard that Aslan is no longer dead, they came back to life, they started to run for the hills, and the good overcame, and the good was victorious. The producer of the movie, when he was thinking through this, because he took a book from C.S. Lewis, and there wasn't this part in there, you know, it's the drama that Hollywood adds to it. They interviewed him later and they said, I needed the Christ character, I needed Aslan to say something, but I didn't know what he could say, so I just had him say, it is finished. Then somebody said, you realize it's in the Bible, right? The guy didn't know it's from the Bible. He just was looking for a great phrase. As I was in preparation for this message, I was talking to a pastor friend of mine, and I said, what does that mean? I mean, it's done, right? Like, I'm about ready, my expiration date is passed, I'm ready to be taken off the shelf, my life is over, right? My shelf life is ended. It's finished. He said, no, the term in the original language was one of victory. Could you imagine being there in the crowd that day and to hear him use this victorious term, and yet here he is hanging on the cross? Now, the Romans probably didn't know what he said. The Jews are like, what? How did he win? Oh, I know. It's going to be like the reverse psychology. It's like when you really want your kids to leave, but they don't really want to leave. You're like, nope, we're going to stay here forever. No, we got to go, Mommy. Nope, we're going to stay here. Don't go get in the car, right? If you have young kids, you know what I'm talking about. You got to use he's just using reverse psychology. He's just telling everybody he won, even though he really didn't. No. The reason why he was saying, it's finished, he said, because the whole reason I came was to die. He knew the rest of the story. Like we come and we celebrate the resurrection, but because we know the rest of the story. Could you imagine being there and Jesus like, it is finished! We win! Woo! And be like, Jesus? And you just wait, right? Because it wasn't until 3 days later. The very last thing that he says. Luke 23:46. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. I think he says it's finished because I know I was forsaken. I know that the substitutionary atonement, the sins of all mankind are placed onto me. We're victorious. Hey, God, hey, Dad, into your hands I commit my spirit. Then he breathes his last. Boom. Now, I wasn't there, but so I have to recreate the events in my mind of what happened next. I think it's at that point. Could you imagine being there? It's finished. We win. Father, I'm coming home. Right? If like Chris Daughtry was there, I'm going home. Please run. Then the earthquake happens. Right? And the ground opens up and the temple veil is torn. And everybody's like, oh, okay. Like dead people who are in the ground like come up and they're walking and talking and witnessing of what's going on. Like we forget all that. That's the reason why the Roman soldier was like, man, this guy truly was the Son of God. Look at everything that just happened. Right? And now all the disciples are like, yeah, now here we go. Come on, Jesus. What? You know the problem with death? You're dead. It's the problem with it, right? It's the reason why nobody wants to die. Because dead people will come back alive, typically. But we can't truly celebrate the resurrection, but to understand that that really should have been us on the cross. Or at least the thief. Right? And what happens is, in America today, in the world today, we don't judge ourselves by a godly standard. Have you noticed that? Because the godly standard is, are you always right all the time? Are you never wrong? Not just when you're arguing with your spouse. I mean, all the time. Have you ever taken anything? Has your words always been true? Have you had perfect motivation in everything? And at some point, you have to say, we're supposed to say no, that we're not perfect, but you know what we typically say? Well, we're not as bad as an insert blank. We judge ourselves not by perfection of what God demands, but how is our moral compass? How is our morality? Am I more good than bad? Do I do more right than wrong? It isn't about right and wrong. It isn't about yes and no. It's are you perfect in the answer every single time? No. We say, well, okay, what do I do? It's the thief, man. It's not about just coming to church. Here's the other thing that we've equated to. Well, Pastor, I've come to church all my life, and I read my Bible, and I pray every day. Yes, but what did you do with Jesus? What have you done with Jesus? Because in a world today, we say, you know what, God, He's awesome, right? God is great. I just wanted to give my props to God. I'm only here today because of the grace and the goodness of God. What have you done with Jesus? That's the question. Before we move on in the service, I just want to give us that opportunity to ask that question.